Hello and welcome to a new webcast from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Hussein Askary. Today is Saturday, May the 24th. Today we have a very special theme to discuss, which we actually previously have not taken up in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative and the international economic developments. And this is the role of nuclear power in fueling international and global economy, but also if it will become the fuel for the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, everybody knows that China is a world champion in solar and wind power generation. But there are other areas that are less known where China is becoming the world champion, like in space technology, space exploration, but also in the nuclear sector, both the conventional nuclear, but also the future fusion power research and development. China has currently 58 operating nuclear reactors of the large scale, around 1,000 megawatts. These are the typical ones. It produces 56 gigawatts or 56,000 megawatts of power. It has further 30 new reactors under construction with a capacity of 34 gigawatts of power. By 2035, China is planning to have about 200 gigawatts of power, which is an enormous development. What this means is not only that China will have a big nuclear power capacity, China will also be developing the technology and the exploration of new technologies and new methods and new techniques. We all know that the United States, for example, was a pioneer in the world in exploring the frontiers of technology, of knowledge, and exploration. But the United States and the West have been losing that capacity in the previous decades, and China is picking it up. Now, besides the conventional discussion about the conventional nuclear capacities China is building, there has been a few real big breakthroughs which are less known to the public and even to a certain way to experts. And to discuss that, we have with us today Mr. Henry Tillman. He is the founder and chairman of, among other companies, of the China Investment Research, a UK-based company, a consultancy. And we are very happy that he could dedicate some time of his busy schedule to share his thoughts with us. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you, Hussein, for that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Usually, conventional nuclear reactors, they use fission reactors, they use uranium, but there's also the element of thorium, which has been in the dark, so to speak. But China recently made a couple of very big breakthroughs in the use of thorium in reactors. And you have been on top of that subject, and you are one of the few people in the world who both have the insight, but also can speak about it. So what has happened with the thorium technology in civilian reactors in China recently?
So one of the criticisms, as you can imagine, historically has been, yes, they existed, but you can't commercialize it, was the criticism, right? So if you go back in a brief history with this, the U.S. ran it on a cargo ship from 62 to 72, then ran it onshore from 65 to 69, but it was only run for 13,000 hours. And the criticism is it's too and it's unstable to commercialize it. So even through the last few years, and I've been talking about this since 2019, people have said you can't commercialize it, and that's what's happened, as you said, is at the end of April, China refueled an existing nuclear reactor with thorium MSR in China. So that put a bullet in the argument of that it doesn't work anymore, right? They just killed the argument. But I think it's worth also telling people this is something China's been following, and India's been following, and Canada's been following for years. So after 72, when the U.S. locked it down, from 70, the IP down from 72 to 2011, post Fukushima, and the world happened, Fukushima happened, the U.S. government, so there's no theft of technology here. The U.S. government opened this up to the whole world. And there's various stories here. Number one is it's all universities, everybody gets it. The second
So
story.
you mean the United States was developing this technology before, but at a certain point they abandoned it and they allowed others to.
They didn't abandon it. They locked it away in
Okay.
1972. They locked it away. So the U.S. and the U.K. together froze the IP.
Mhm.
And in 2011, they released the IP after Fukushima. So the three stories are: one, that's the whole world got it. The second story is Harry Reid and Udall, two of the U.S. senators, national senators from those two states, said, let's open it up. And the third story is actually someone from the USA actually handed the IP to Jiang Zemin's son in the USA. But the point is, the whole world got it, right? So what happened then is China has been following this since the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. So is India, so is Russia. And they knew how unique this was and wanted to jump on it when they could. So I don't want to jump ahead in the story, but on that component of this discussion, Asia was quick to jump on this. And so therefore, you then have a solution. They jumped on this in 2011. And by 2029, 18 years, you're going to have this as a commercial business. That's incredibly rapid because they have 400 people, in my opinion, working around the clock every day to get this done in such a short period of time. What's happened is after that, when 2011 went out to these other countries, some grabbed it, some didn't. The East jumped all over this to develop this as fast as possible, and they're so far ahead. The West didn't pick it up straight away. So what you've seen, you're saying, in the last year or so, is the West scrambling because they realize they built these AI juggernauts, basically, which require a huge amount of power, and they didn't build the power to drive them. So what you have a situation in the world right now is Asian countries are building that infrastructure and that power which you're referring to. Yes, and the West needs it much more than that. So there's a huge scramble of how fast the West can now, after waiting all these years, to say we need to do this, now to scramble to try and fill the gap. So it's quite an interesting situation where the East knew what was in there for years. They studied it before it was locked down and jumped all over it. And now they are addressing how to drive these countries, whether it's BRI countries or otherwise. Yes.
Right.
Yes, off this new power.
Yeah. There's one of the Chinese officials who announced this question about the thorium, reactor refueling. He's from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He used the image of the Aesop's fable, the turtle and the hare, the rabbit.
I remember that. That's true.
and he said China has been working slowly but steadily on this thorium nuclear development, while the West was like, they're very fast, but then they stop, they become complacent, they become lazy, or they completely ignore this development. And now they have to catch up. But the turtle has been going steadily and now reaching the end of the line, in a sense. But there is enormous room for everybody actually to participate. I think this kind of competition is welcome. Instead of trying to trip your opponent, stopping them from developing, you should also develop your own capabilities. And I think this is quite healthy for the world, isn't it?
So to pick up your point, yes, he did use the term, sometimes a rabbit gets lazy, I think is the term he used. Actually, it's quite appropriate. So it did exist before. It was functional before. It was locked down for 50 years. And then everyone, when it became free, the Asians jumped all over it to move it forward very quickly. That's one piece of it. The second piece, just to be clear, there's another uranium-based SMR called One, and that will be
SMRs. The SMRs are small modular reactors.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm so close to it. You're right.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I get stuck in this, actually. Sorry. Thanks for the help. But China jumped all over that as well. So that'll be functional commercial in 26. And the big reactor, Thorium, functional by 29. This is years ahead of the West. And the West all knows this. Yes, those are all two things that are unique to China. Yes.
Yeah. The advantage of the small modular reactors is that they can be produced rather quickly on conveyor belts. They can be deployed very easily. because these very large nuclear power plants, they need enormous preparations. They need many environmental and other studies and security aspects, and they cost very much. So here in Sweden, we have been blessed to have very early on, which is one of the reasons for industrialization in Sweden. Not only we had hydropower at the beginning of the industrialization, but then after World War II, there was enormous investment in large nuclear power plants. But then here in Sweden, we abandoned that process. But now there's enormous research and investments in small modular reactors and even fourth generation. But this is experimental. This is happening in universities because everybody is, because of the global energy crisis, the Ukraine war, and also the climate, the green transition. Many people are now saying nuclear power is the answer as a clean energy, as a carbon-free energy, and so on and so forth. So small modular reactors have many other functions. But let's go back to the question of
thorium. Can I have one more piece about thorium, please? The next piece is that China is building the world's largest container ship, and that will be powered by thorium as well. Mm-hmm. So it's also not just a massive Gobi Desert thing. Yes, which will be, I think, 60 megawatts by 2030, 2029. You then have, I think, 33 at last count, small SMRs being powered by 111. Yes, and then now you have, the world's largest container ship to be powered by thorium, all powered by China.
Yeah. So China has the only functioning thorium reactor. They recently refueled the reactor while it was running, which is a novelty in a sense. But also there was a major discovery of thorium resources. I think you discussed this some time ago. Because the thorium is more abundant in nature than uranium. But the Chinese are now
a lot cheaper.
Yeah. There was a major mining discovery in China, and people were talking about that this would be enough for tens of thousands of years of supply of thorium for energy production. How true is that?
They've upsized the estimate. A year ago was 20,000 years. We're now talking 60,000 years. 60,000 years. And I might say that, remember, China is not the largest deposit. India is the largest deposit in Australia. But it's widely among 35, it's distributed among 35 countries. So no one has a lock on this.
Okay, so you have been focusing on this question of the thorium because this is something which has been undermined in a sense or neglected for a long period of time, and now it's picking up because this is both. There's abundance, there is a possibility of commercializing it, but also there are also inherent, security features for thorium reactors, which people talk about, which makes it, some people say, safer than the normal uranium fission reactors.
Well, it is a Gen 4, so the first Chinese thorium reactor, MSR you're talking about, is a Gen 4 reactor. So it is safe, it can't explode. Or if it does explode, it's wrapped by MSR, as you talked about before. So it still takes time, though, for people to process this stuff. We work with many countries. So the country understands this, the management of the country understands this, but it takes time to get people that live in the country to get comfortable with the concept. Because they're stuck in Gen 1, Gen 2, which could explode. They can't think this is Gen 3, Gen 4 stuff, right? Gen 3, the first Gen 3 was in the world was in China, and now Gen 4, the first Gen 4 in the world is China. That's how far ahead they are.
Yeah, in 2023, I think China announced the first commercial fourth generation. That's what you mean by Gen 3, Gen 4. That's the fourth generation, which has, it's called passive safety measures. But I think the thorium reactor...
It also doesn't sit on water, which you saw with the other places that melted down didn't have water. So there's no water involved.
Yes, there's no water involved. And the thorium reactor you're referring to, it uses molten salt as both as a cooler, a coolant, but also as a carrier of the fuel itself. I mean, sodium chloride, table salt, if it's heated to 801 degrees, I tried to figure out what that means. If it's heated to 801 degrees, it becomes a fluid. And that fluid is very practical to use in these thorium reactors, both as a coolant, but also as a carrier of the thorium and other fission fuel.
But one more breakthrough also, for the first time, Russia last year on their floating nuclear power plants, sorry, FNPPs, and their FNPP also added fuel to it for the first time last year. And then this year, this last month, they have their 1 billionth kilowatt hour of functionality. So they're, again, first FNPP in the world, floating nuclear power plant in Russia. And there's a great deal of complementarity, as you can see, from China's thorium in the Gobi Desert, SMRs, and then Russia's floating nuclear power plants.
Right.
Yes, as BRI countries together.
Mm-hmm. So this becomes part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Which is
very much. And we'll talk about that a little later when you get your questions through.
All right. Yeah, these small modular reactors, they can be built on floating barges. They can be taken anywhere. I think the Russians have it in the Arctic area and remote areas. But also small reactors can be used on ships, as you said about this container ship. But I think the Russians, they have a few icebreakers in the Arctic Sea, in the North Sea, icebreakers that are fueled with nuclear. They are nuclear powered, which makes it, to open the trade routes in the north for the shipping from Asia to Europe across the Northern Sea. So there are many practical.
Like Chinese seas, all the islands off China, all the islands off Indonesia. There's lots of uses for this offshore, as you're mentioning. But for the first time last year, Russia's taking it onshore. There's a floating natural SMR, which is first time in Uzbekistan.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's lots of uses. This is all happening very quickly, which is why I'm throwing all these things in the mix, not to confuse your listeners, to show you all the things that are happening. Because once you put all these players on the pieces on the chessboard, they start moving very quickly.
Exactly. I mean, also you have the water desalination. Water is becoming a big issue in many island nations, especially coastal areas. You can use nuclear power to desalinate, but also you can use the oil to use, the United Arab Emirates. They have built 4 major nuclear reactors in cooperation with Korea, both to generate electricity for industries and also for water desalination. But now they can take the oil and gas in the United Arab Emirates and turn it into industrial material with a much higher added value. Instead of burning the fossil fuels, you can use them as a very valuable industrial material. You can produce all kinds of things with oil and gas, fertilizers, plastics, and so on. So this is a revolutionary development, and but you think that this will be some sort of a revolutionizing the communication and the infrastructure along the Belt and Road Initiative. China is always open to share its technology with other nations. I think the Chinese have built already 2 major reactors in Karachi 1 and Karachi 2 in Pakistan, using the Chinese model, Hualong 1 model. But how would that affect the Belt and Road nations?
So what we do is obviously every day is we track this stuff. Who's got what, where. And back to the SMRs, in 26, they're becoming the long one, as you discussed. There are a number of these that are being built, and will continue to be built before 2030. It's been stated that many of these will go to BRI countries, as you've talked about already. Yes, with some big numbers associated with that. And so they would get priority to get that. But there are also, alongside that, a number of countries currently using Russian capabilities. And in some cases, Russia and China are working together. For example, in Bolivia, that's nuclear and lithium, where Russia and China together are doing that. So there's a lot more cooperation between it. And again, offshore floating from Russia versus some of the needs of China, offshore islands. There's lots of cooperation. Same in the north and the Arctic. I've been working on those papers, as you know, since 2018 that you referred to a few minutes ago. So there's lots of that collaboration together. but it is in fact, as you say, steered towards BRI countries. I'm a firm believer in down the road, but maybe 2040, 2045, Eurasia, crossing Eurasia from the northeast of Asia across to Europe will be done AI, driverless cars, lorries, trains powered by thorium power. And that goes all the way across Eurasia and go all the way down to Riyadh. Yes, so it would be powered by this because the power is so powerful. And by the way, it's not stopping there. The most recent collaboration was announced 2 weeks ago, where Russia and China decided they announced they would build the first reactor on the moon together by 2035. Mm-hmm. That's 10 days old, so that should be updated for your listeners.
I think that China and the global South, working with Russia, driving this process is quite interesting. And it should be a wake-up call for people here in Europe, in the United States, in Japan, because the Japanese also became complacent after Fukushima. The Germans, they shot themselves in the feet by shutting down nuclear power and becoming completely dependent on either Russian gas or coal. They have no alternative. So this whole deindustrialization process has been, but now with China, Russia, the global South moving ahead, this must be a wake-up call for everybody. Recently, by the way, we would like to thank you and the China Investment Research for allowing us to print the assessment and your analysis of the China, Caribbean, Latin American Summit meeting in Beijing, which went unnoticed in a certain way. And we got very good feedback from people, including from Latin America, who thought that your work was quite informative because you enlist all the cooperation areas, both current and future areas of development. But there is a nuclear aspect, as I think you hinted at it, both for the China, Latin America, and Caribbean. As everybody knows, that the United States is worried that China is becoming very active in its backyard, but I don't think this should be considered a threat. But what kind of cooperation is going on between China and Latin America and the Caribbean in this area?
Yes, well, I mentioned Bolivia, where both countries are involved, but I'd say the biggest one of note public is Argentina, with the major nuclear reactor from 2022. I'm not sure in the current administration of Argentina that would carry on for the reasons you already know. But I am very aware that there are many discussions about SMRs from any point south of Los Angeles all the way down about possibilities of working with them, right? And as you saw the piece that we wrote, the transformation of Nicaragua, yes, in the last year and a half is extraordinary what's happening there, as you rightfully point out by our research. So I see several places where it could work, but these are SMRs, and these are private discussions, but we only list what's public in what we gave you, but we're aware because of our job of who's talking to whom about what levels, and that's not, and that can be several countries in Latin America, but I think it's also fair to say with 22 out of the 33 countries now members from 23 now with Colombia, the 33 countries south of the U.S. That's a pretty big change in 20 years, huh?
Right. They are members in the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
Yeah.
Extraordinary change, yeah. And many of those, by the way, used to be supporters of Taiwan and no longer are part of Taiwan. So these are massive changes. So I think it's fair to say people that run these countries in those countries below there don't want to be much more public in their thinking. But I can assure you they are all thinking of their options. And of course, the only two options right now that are functional, and it's not just there, Hussein, it's also Asia. We just did these two pieces. I think you saw them before. Of the ASEAN countries, we did a piece, this was 2 months ago. 3 of the ASEAN countries have moved immediately to this stuff. So you have Singapore said, let's go nuclear, let's go SMR. We were shocked in a short period of time. Malaysia said this. We met with the Prime Minister. It's 10 years to build it. We're going to go nuclear. Vietnam and Myanmar signed up Russia. This is all moving so quickly. Yes, and then I think the piece we just gave you 2 weeks ago showed we usually do quarterly reports and what's happening per quarter. We've seen in this Q2. We've seen 7 Asian countries progress specific developments in nuclear in half a quarter, 45 days. Conversely, in the West, we saw Ontario authorize building one SMR as part of a 4 SMR grouping. And an irony of all ironies, one of the leading SMRs in the world with thorium is called Copenhagen Atomics to help the world. We like the company very much. Yet Denmark still has a 40-year block on the nuclear. Mm-hmm. So Copenhagen Atomics is actually helping the world, and actually agriculture you just talked about in Indonesia. But Denmark itself is still locked down. So all the things I just told you is in 45 days is extraordinary. In an Asian countries, many islands, and they're still taking this risk, right? They think.
We have had a taboo on nuclear power thinking, but in the recent years, because of, as I said, the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, the sanctions on Russia, that everybody's now realizing that we have this source of clean energy, intensive energy, which is very important for industrial processes, for all kinds of things. And we have not even, touched upon it. But there are others, of course, have been working in the meantime, like China, as you mentioned.
Well, they have long memories. Asia has long memories, right? They knew what was there before, and they didn't forget it. Just because they couldn't have it didn't mean they forgot it.
Exactly. And now we have had a monopoly over the technology, but now that monopoly is broken. And the interesting thing is
they offered it up. No one stole it. The U.S. offered it up.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Chinese are also developing their own technology. They are not simply, adapting, but this is a big myth that the Chinese don't innovate; they just copy. It's not true. They will surpass everybody in many fields of technology. But what is special with the Chinese is they always share these technologies with others. As I said, they have with Pakistan. They are sharing the high-speed railway technology with other Belt and Road countries. Russia is doing the same. I looked at how many countries in Africa, for example, have civilian nuclear agreements with Russia. There are more than 22 countries. With China, there are about 7, 8. The United States, 3. The EU, 1. So the EU that is discouraging African nations from using nuclear technology, while Russia and China are encouraging these countries, and these countries are saying, look, we need this technology because nuclear technology is not simply just energy, because you have a massive scientific, side effect of it in research. You can have it, you can use nuclear isotopes for agricultural research, for healthcare, cancer treatment, diagnosis, and all these things. All these things come out of nuclear reactors or nuclear research. So solar power does not give you that kind of thing. Gas and oil burning does not give you that kind of scientific effects of nuclear technology. So I work
on this every day, my friend. And so in specific countries, you're spot on. But remember one last thing about the English language. The hardest word is change. And remember, when countries like China and Russia are innovative, they drive, then sanctions, they drive. Innovation drives this. So your mentality is one of innovation or survival. Yes, we have to do this to survive, i.e. the chips and Huawei. Fantastic story, right?
Yeah.
But not everyone thinks that way anymore. So the ones that have it, drive it. But it's so difficult to change people. It takes time. And when those countries that have that mentality will push it, as you're seeing.
Yeah. And when it catches fire, it goes much quicker. It's accelerates.
That's what's happening now. It's just extraordinary. As I told you, we've never done a half quarter. We do a half a quarter now in developments in nuclear. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But it's all Asia. It's all emerging markets.
Right.
Not the West.
Yeah, because it takes time to get that capacity.
What's happening, right? But I can assure you, there are queues all over the world for this stuff, and China's been working on this backlog and who gets what for a number of years in those SMRs, right? Yeah. And also when they're all fully go in at 100 megs in per SMR by 2029, 2030.
Mm-hmm.
They're covering
Yeah,
over 30 countries, right? And the development of giving this stuff.
yeah. Did you? I mean, I advise people to read your newsletters and follow your work. But have you looked at the question of financing? Are there financial resources for this kind of developments? But also, to build all these SMRs, all these nuclear, it needs also enormous amounts of steel and steel technology and other machinery, machine tooling, all these things. You cannot just decide to build a nuclear reactor. For example, Finland wanted to build a nuclear reactor, but they cannot build it. They have to import all parts and technologies from many different countries. But the Chinese seem to have domestically built up the supply chain for such an industry, so they can get all the components quickly on a conveyor belt and start building these. So there's
they've been working on this since 2000. This is 2011, and the SMRs since 2008. So they're pretty well focused on what they want to do. Mm-hmm. But and the same with Russia. But if you pick up your other question about financing, we're in that business. So what we're seeing is that I think the most recent numbers we do track this. There are 80 different manufacturers of SMRs in 18 different countries. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is explosive amounts of private equity looking at this stuff, right? For numerically, right? So you've just seen a fund just launched in Copenhagen, Fund 92, just in the last couple of months. But a number of these countries, a number of these SMRs are now type Series A, Series B. There's plenty of private equity chasing this, and unfortunately, my words, not somebody else's, the stocks are trading on this. The public stocks that are public in the West are trading on this expectation, which is not going to have revenues before 31, 32. So that's very brave of some people to pile into this stuff, knowing there's no revenues for quite a while.
Right. There's one advantage China has is that the state has a lot of money and they can finance this kind of thing without any problems. And they can also mobilize enormous human resources, universities, think tanks, research centers, every kind of resources at their disposal.
Same in Russia, right? Rosatom is their world leader. Mm-hmm. Rosatom has done as a commercial company. It's worth $20 billion. Outstanding. You did some of the statistics you just did with Africa. That's Rosatom. Same with Asia, Rosatom, public company. They've done very, very well out of this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there aren't many like that, as you rightfully point out. But it's being driven from the top.
Right. Oh, this is a fascinating development. What does the future hold for this?
I just stay tuned. It's going to keep rolling out. I think it's going to be exponential growth. Yes, for the next 10 years. Yes, I mean just very broader. It will be. You saw the discussions last night in Washington about they're going to refocus on this, but they're so far behind. They've had to reopen to plug the gap on the AI gap. They've had to reopen two of their closed reactors, including 3 Mile Island. Mm-hmm. It's been reopened. So yes, there's a desperation to get this done, but it takes a long time. As you see, the reactor for the Gobi Desert is 5 years to launch in 25. It takes even with all that set up with 15 years investments and roughly $6 billion is my estimate of total purchase to build this. It still takes a lot.
That's the turtle. That's the turtle.
I would say building a nuclear power plant 10 years is not exactly a turtle because they did it in 10 years.
No, I mean the process involved. You have to work a long time to get it right. And then as soon as you manage it and you get all the aspects, you understand all the aspects, then you can accelerate. As I said, these small modular reactors, you can produce them on a conveyor belt. Here in Sweden, actually, even in Denmark, there were ideas that instead of shipping, because the shipping industry was going down, that the shipyards will be used as conveyor belts to build these small modular reactors. There are many people who had ideas to use the shipyards to produce these small reactors on a like a conveyor belt basis. So serial, because as soon as you have the design, you have the materials and the supply chains and the technology in place, then you can just repeat the process. It's like producing cars, but this is a bit more sophisticated process. It's a lot of security issues and so on. But it's not different. But to reach that critical moment, you need to make enormous efforts.
And this is the conundrum the West has, because the need is now, and you can't just build them now, as you rightfully point out. Yes?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a mad scramble.
Yeah. No, I think, as I said earlier, this might kick a healthy competition for scientific, technological research rather than trade wars. And why not cooperate with China and Russia? Hopefully, we have a peace settlement in Ukraine. But why not work with the nations who have reached advanced stages, and we can share the technology and the benefits of that for the sake of all humanity?
Great idea. I think, in fact, I believe the nuclear plant in Ukraine is subject to who gets to manage what. I understand the U.S. wants a piece of that, managing that. So I'm not involved in that discussion, nor do I want to be, but it's it's happening where people can work together. There it is, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, instead of scrambling and fighting over a pie, and a small pie, we need to, as the Chinese say, to make the pie bigger, make many pies, and share that together, because the only resource which is not limited in nature is human knowledge. And the more we consume of knowledge, the bigger it becomes, ironically. So it's an unending source, which is very, scarcely used, like thinking.
It's the underlying message of the Belt and Road.
Exactly. The Belt and Road and the idea of a community of a shared future for mankind is very, very crucial. This is a win-win kind of cooperation, which very few people in the West understand, because we are ideologically conditioned to believe in zero-sum games. Somebody wins, somebody loses. That's the nature of things. But I think we need to learn something from the Asians. Well, there are situations where both sides can win. But we should stop thinking about this zero-sum issue and other prejudices and problems we have had in the West. Well, if you don't,
it'll be interesting to see 5 years from now. It'll be really. Just assume. Let's say it goes the way it is currently going. The West could be in a real problem 3 or 5 years, because the power we're talking about that's all going to come through in China and in Russia. It can't be blocked, even though the Senate wants to try and block it. I can't see that happening, because, as you said, the supply chains are in their own country. So let's see what happens. It could be very interesting. There are a number of Western parties, including in the UK here. Core Power itself is talking about what you're talking about, which is using U.S. Ports basically to build shipment places to build local SMRs. But let's see. Let's just see what happens. Right now, the trajectory is with Russia and China and all the friends along the Belt and Road for now.
Yes. Well, great, Henry. Thank you very much for making us aware of these developments and also sharing your knowledge and insights with us. And I hope people will go to your website. They might send you messages and ask you more about what you know about this.
Well, there are 3 websites, right? There's China Investment Research, there's China Research, and there's Asia Investment Research. Those are 3 different parts of the world. So
great. That's enormous wealth.
You've got to use all 3 actually to get there.
Yes. We will post the website addresses for these 3 different sites. Also, the article I mentioned about the China, Latin America, Caribbean Summit. But people can click on the address and visit your websites. It will be in the description of this video.
Thank you for the opportunity to present, because the more we educate, the better it is. There's just no one in the West giving us the opportunity to share these details, because sometimes the facts we tell them aren't exactly the stories they're hearing.
Yeah, that's a great. We are happy to. We appreciate that you could be with us today. Thank you very much, Henry.
Thank you, Hussein, as ever. Okay, all the best.
Thank you.